what fucking marketing team wants to do timesheets? So I think
they all do.
But I think that'd be. Hello and welcome to episode 253 of the Rockstar CMO effing marketing podcast. It's Wednesday, the 15th of January. Hope you're liking the change and staying as sane as you feel you need to be. I'm your host, Ian Truscott. I'm not a rockstar, but I am a CMO. And on this podcast, I chat with a group of chums who share their marketing street knowledge, which I hope will bring out the Rockstar CMO marketer in you. This week, Jeff Clark, our resident strategy advisor and former Forrester research director, is back from his holidays, and we dig into an article about channels and budgets that caught his eye. But first, we need to pay the bar tab. I'll be back in a moment.
We'll be right back. After this word. We'll be right back. After this word.
This episode is brought to you by Amazon. Sometimes the most painful part of getting sick is the getting better part. Waiting on hold for an appointment, sitting in crowded waiting rooms, standing in line at the pharmacy, that's painful. Amazon One Medical and Amazon Pharmacy remove those painful parts of getting better with things like 24/7 virtual visits and prescriptions delivered to your door. Thanks to Amazon Pharmacy and Amazon One Medical, healthcare just got less painful.
So let's get to the marketing studio and join my chum, Jeff Clark, our resident strategy advisor.
Hello, Ian. It's so good to see you in the Rockstar studio after such a long break.
Yes, my friend. In fact, I forgot to tee you up to say, just remember that you're introducing me. And I like the way that the muscle memory kicked in.
The muscle memory definitely kicked in.
It's delightful, man. It's nice to see you again. I know we've chatted since you come back from holiday, but it's always a pleasure, and it's great to have you back on the show.
Always a pleasure to be here.
Always a pleasure. Good show. And how was your break?
It was good. It was a long one. And, when you spend a month in the far north reaches of Norway, there's, we caught some snow, did some skiing, did some snowshoeing. Obviously nice having Christmas there. Caught some colds hanging around little kids. Brought one back. And had the lovely 2.5 day flight back. Because of bad weather that was happening in the Central and Eastern Europe. So,
good Lord.
Yeah.
Nice. So you had a white Christmas by the sounds of things.
We had a white Christmas, yes. Very much so.
Very nice. And now you're back in the saddle, and you've actually suggested for us this week an article by Rand Fishkin of SparkToro fame. And we I was talking about this the other day. For such a small firm, they do not make some impact, don't they, in B2B marketing? And lots of people are referring to the work that these guys do. I mean, you see a lot of them being quoted about the place. But anyway, Rand Fishkin, he's written on the Spark, and this is actually an article we were looking at before you went away, back at the end of November, which I have to give, to fully give credit to everybody who's on this. It's a collaboration with somebody called Dana Di Tomaso, who I don't know, who's the founder of the KP or Kickpoint Playbook. And the article that we're referring to on the SparkToro blog this week is, and it's got quite a long title, "If your audience's sources of influence and your marketing budget don't align, you're going to have a bad time." I mean, here's
Who's
a guy
in charge of titles there.
Yeah, well, here's a guy that knows an awful lot about SEO and all that kind of malarkey.
Well, maybe every word there has value in SEO.
Absolutely. I presume this is the way we should all be going with these long titles. But anyway, in this article, he looks at the amount of budget we spend on each of 14 different channels, and then he's looked at how influential each of those channels is to the buyers. With some interesting discrepancies between what we're spending and what we're focusing on in terms of those channels and which ones are actually influential with our buyers. Probably, as you can imagine from the title, sometimes we don't get it right. There's some discrepancies in this.
Sometimes.
So, Jeff, you've been digging into this. What did you find? What say you?
Well, he has this example $1 billion budget, and he doesn't note whether this is an actual budget or something, kind of fashioned from his experience to prove a point. But I think it is, he's basically he's asking us as marketers to do an exercise. So the 14 channels, kind of go through a lot of the typical channels you think about for spending your campaign dollars, like social channels and industry websites and podcasts. Some interesting things like, thinking about advertising into Slack and WhatsApp and Facebook groups, obviously Google search, everything, down to your own email newsletters. So, in this example, there's alignment on spend and influence in some areas, 2 or 3% off, and then other areas there's some pretty big departures. And so I think that we've got some thoughts on this based on looking at the where there is major discrepancy, but just the exercise itself. So and it what's when we looked at the original blog post, he's got this really nice sort of pie chart within a pie chart, and so we were looking at it and saying, this looks off and that looks off. So I had to throw it into a spreadsheet because that's the only way I could see, whether the percentages were aligned or not. And so there's some interesting things, and I think we're going to tee you up to make the first observation.
All right, so I'm going for. So I didn't know if you were going to sort of point out some of the big discrepancies, but I guess that'll come out through our conversation, won't it? Because I have the good fortune of being able to see your spreadsheet and the report in front of me, so I didn't. But I can see you've highlighted some things on here, so we'll go through it. One of the things, I like how far you've gone into this. It's quite a brief blog post, isn't it? And we're doing our best to describe this quite visual but short post for audio. And yes, you're right, we have some observations. It's kind of brief, but the thing I was wondering about, and I don't know if you're digging into it, got any deeper into this, but I was wondering what was included in the term budget, because in my experience, the larger investment of this is often time from the team, right? So, and sometimes they can be a huge distraction, some of these channels, and a bit of a time suck. And actually, the external spend is relatively small. It just one of your team just spends all bloody afternoon dicking around with it, right? It's just, and so it's not just the time we spend, but also I think that some of these ideas like come into the marketing room, and then we have to get creative with them, and we spend an afternoon talking about it and all that kind of stuff. And it kind of sucks all the creative oxygen out of the room, because now we're focusing on a different channel or and we're not thinking about the campaign. Like we're always talking about how we need to be focused on the campaign and not just the channel. And that's what I think the problem with this, it kind of highlights the channel a bit too much, doesn't it, really, rather than the whole thing. And my other observation is thinking about the time and money that we spend, and how much of this is time and how much of this is money. Some of this stuff is we're doing it because we've always done it, right? It's the old hamster wheel that we always bang on about on this podcast. And I'd be interested in how much of these hamster wheel revolutions are included in this thing, right? So if you look at some of the channels that he talks about, for example, like conferences and events, well, there are some marketing organizations that are going to do conferences and events with barely a kind of they just do them. That's what we do, and it's
every
good
year
for brand, and we do this thing every year, and we're not going to. And so I'm wondering, I was wondering about that. And the third thought I had on this whole thing, when we think about time and money and budget and what's included in this, is also, I bet you this is the tip of the iceberg, and at the bottom there's all of the technology and the maintenance that going into it and all that kind of stuff, and all the sort of analogies that we make often, like, for example, you may have a free tool, but it's not free beer, it's a new puppy, right? All of these things, they have an awful lot of maintenance that goes on around them. So I found it difficult to figure out what was meant in this article about budget, whether it was time, whether it was resources, whether it was spend. So what did you think?
Well, when I was both a client of Serious Decisions and when I was working there, and we would do these kind of budget benchmark exercises, and how does your spend, compare to similar organizations in similar markets and stuff like that. And it's like, you really have got to include your budget or your campaign spend, your staff overhead, your tech, your services. I mean, you really want to roll everything up. And when it comes to the overhead items, sometimes you can do kind of an even weighting across, all of your channels. But that's where it's like something like a marketing resource management solution comes in, when you can actually log hours and associated costs and technology to a particular campaign and to a particular channel. So it's that's this is really, I think, what this post is pointing to is just a really good exercise that we should be doing as marketers on a regular basis to say, how are we actually doing what's effective because we're engaging in the channels that influence our buyers. And so first, you're making the great point. You got to roll up all the costs, because if it's just, your program dollars, then you may be missing something.
I think, and I agree with you about it being a good exercise. And I think that just like a lot of this kind of work, it may not actually be, maybe if you got the whole thing rolled up to the nearest cent or whatever, that may be a bit overkill, right? It's going to take you too long to do that. But if you're getting a sense of, well, that's interesting, this channel isn't that influential, and yet I'm doing it, I should just stop. That's good. But of all, look, sorry, mate.
I was just going to say on that, sometimes, you're right that, unless you've got a tool that's like capturing all this data, it might be where you say, I know what my program dollars are, and I could just put a, high, medium, low effort onto it.
Yes. Yeah.
So, we go to this conference, maybe the conference is reasonably expensive or inexpensive, but my God, the effort we put off to pull it off is just incredible. We do these social ads, and we're not.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I've been in a situation where basically a big chunk of the marketing team is pretty much closed down because of a major event that's happening or something like that.
Oh, absolutely.
And you've got no wiggle room on something like that. The other thing as well is to truly track all this stuff, you're going to need to be like an agency inside, and therefore you're going to need to do timesheets. I mean, what fucking marketing team wants to do timesheets? So I think
they all do.
But I think that'd be but anyway, I don't mean to undermine the whole idea, because I think the premise of the post is really good. But I think that there's a lot of devil in the budget detail into what you're thinking about. And also, I think this is also an important discussion when something new comes into the room, where as I keep joking, some executive says we should be on TickFace. Well, it's not just about some junior member of the team posting on it. You need to think about everything else that's going to go into that, right? So. Anyway, so back to the 14 they chose, and none of them was TickFace.
Which is going to be banned in the United States.
Well, I'm going to launch TickFace because I keep saying TickFace all the time. So it'll get banned before it's even launched. What was the big discrepancy that pointed out that popped out for you? Because like you say, you took their kind of two different data points and put it into a spreadsheet. So that's quite interesting.
Yeah, the big discrepancy was on non-branded Google search terms, in terms of we're underspending. So, but a big caveat, because to me, working on organic search there's a lot of time and energy involved in that. So working with agencies, et cetera. So what's in that is saying, my gosh, we're underspending by 24%. But I think the good point is that around that is that the buyers are doing their work to find out where they can get information about how to address their particular buying needs, going to Google, and other search engines to start that process is probably the first place you're going to run into them. And so the converse of that, or the inverse of that, is that there was overspending on industry websites, social feeds, Apple and Google News. So these may be places where you think, or you've been given the dictate from your executive team that this is the place we need to be, because maybe that you're looking for exposure to a certain set of subscribers, just like our old in my old advertising days, who's reading this magazine? Okay, we need to be there. Or you want to influence the influencers and the editors, but you find the buyers are making their own decisions on how to find this information, and they're not necessarily trusting, the industry media to get them there. That doesn't say that they're not important in some way, but at least these numbers are telling us we're putting a little bit too much reliance on them.
Do you know what? Also, that so I've tested the word budget, but now I'm going to test the word influence, which is I don't know how we could measure that attribution, and I was going to make that point a little bit later as well. But I was very surprised to find that, and I don't know, I can't remember, is it B2B or B2C, but certainly I would be surprised by the under engagement for non-branded search terms, which is a standard, very much a standard tool in our B2B marketing toolbox, that I thought that everybody kind of heavily leaned into. But then if you think about it, this is about the proportion of time that you should be spending. So what I think they're saying is that people are spending spending time and budget on non-branded search terms, but because they're spending time on these other things which are actually fucking useless. They should actually not spend any time on those things and spend more time and more budget on non-branded search terms. It's a proportional thing, isn't it? So I think,
and I think you're raising a question about influence, because again, he's not defining his terms and influence. So if it was engagement, you'd say, oh, well, that's probably a measurable, click view, whatever. Influence sort of implies that it's like, in addition to the engagement, that there's some amount of, trust, and I'm weighing the information I'm getting through the conferences more than I'm weighing the information I'm getting through the industry newsletter, or whatever that discrepancy is.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
So how do you think we get into these disconnects between where we put our budget, how we're defining budget, and how we influence our buyers?
However we're defining influence. Well, thank you for asking, Jeff. I think some of this is I think we over-index on some of these channels. Some of it is because we're doing things other marketers do, right? We do it because we see this is the blueprint. This is how we do B2B marketing. You have this particular media mix, you have this particular channel mix, and everybody does the same, right? So I think what was interesting there, and I think, we've probably used more words to discuss this article than there are words in the article, which I think is interesting, right? So I think we definitely need to dig into some of this data a bit more and be to answer some of our own questions on this. But I think some channels, for example, like social, where the report actually suggests that we're over-indexing on social and we should do less of it because it's not that influential with our buyer, define influence, etc. I think it's because sometimes we forget we're not our buyer. So we do things because other marketers do them, So we need to post on LinkedIn, or we need to post on Twitface or whatever, because that's what we do, right, as marketers. And I think, and one of the points I'm making increasingly recently is this, we're always talking about the disruption of somebody coming into the marketing room with an idea and saying, let's go do this, right? And often it's because they've seen a competitor do it. So, but I think that's like glimpsing at the top of an iceberg. You see a competitor do something like, oh my God, they've got a strong presence on LinkedIn. And an executive says, we must do that. But what we only see is the tactic. We don't see how well it's performed for them or any of that kind of stuff. But nonetheless, we follow the herd. So it might be that we're all doing something and looking at each other and going, that's because they're doing it. Nobody's getting any performance out of it. So I think that's interesting about this particular report. It maybe suggests that there's some motivation about why we're doing these things and why they're not performing, but everybody's doing them anyway, right? And So sorry, you were going to say something about
Well, I
that.
was going to say that, and as I remember, I mean, it's particularly when new channels come on. Like I remember
Yeah.
when social became a channel, and
Yeah.
or YouTube becomes a channel, or and you know when LinkedIn gets good at being able to market their own marketing,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like, oh, we got to be there.
Yeah.
You know, I remember a client I was working at before where, you know, we were really excited about doing LinkedIn advertising. And then we realized that the type of people we sell to, they're just not on LinkedIn very long. But they might actually have a profile on LinkedIn, but they just don't get on the platform.
Yeah.
Whereas in some, you know, certainly marketers are on LinkedIn all the time.
Yeah. And I mean, I really like the work that Spark Turo does, and we refer to it a few times on this podcast. But I looking at this, especially as it's just like a very high level, you know, single post. But I think we need to be slightly cautious of these sorts of reports, because I think attribution is not an exact science. So we might be, and obviously we've already questioned what it means by budget and what it means by influence. So we've kind of undermined the very fabric of this report. But you might be pulling on the lever of one channel on the slot machine, but the money doesn't come out of that slot machine; it comes out of another one, right? It's my latest analogy, because you might be creating some great brand equity, maybe on your social channels. I mean, we've just been picking on social just a minute ago, right? But it might be that actual influence, that the buyer themselves attributes the influence to something else that they did, right? And they don't think about the fact that there was this air cover and you're being mentioned 5 times, you know, and it played a role. So I think it's healthy to have a mix, and I think it's also healthy to have some of these discrepancies, because I don't think our measurement is that accurate. But I might be doing Spark Tour a bit of a disservice here, because we're not entirely sure how they worked all this out. What do you think?
Well, I think the post is basically underscoring the point that every solution's buyers are unique. Every buying group is unique. Every buying process, you know, individual, committee, consensus buying are unique, and things change over time. So really, it's like this, you know, it just needs to get down to, you need to do the research about where your buyers are and what their journey's like, and have that determine, you know, your marketing mix. And it's just, you know, it's like we're bringing out all the points about, you know, why just don't do it because other marketers do it. Don't do it because your competitors seem to be there, because you don't really know if the competitors are getting anything out of it.
Yeah.
You know, don't do it because it's easy. So it's like you got to do it because it connects.
Yeah. So what you're saying there is that one size doesn't fit all on these kinds of things, right? So you're saying we take this report kind of and apply it as best we can, but our situation is going to be unique. Is that what you're saying there? Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. So and you would continuing digging into the data on this. So what else did you find?
One of the things that which I think is somewhat the premise of Mr. Fishkin's you know, the thrust of the reason he put this post is, don't throw money where your execs tell you.
Yeah.
Because if it doesn't move the needle, then as much as they think, then you need to be able to prove that. And you know, as we've mentioned in the show many times, every executive thinks they understand marketing as good or better as you do. They have their past, you know, their pet, you know, conferences or whatever that they have, you know, and that can steer you in the wrong direction. So as he, just quoting Rand Fishkin, it's like, you know, that your customers' sources of influence are broader than the few places the exec team wants to put budget.
Yeah.
So, you know, we mentioned some of the other areas that are, you mentioned some of the ones that, like conferences and social ads, where there's discrepancy between spend and influence. And then that's where my experience is that some companies, that they're exactly like, you know, we have to be at this trade show or this conference. We do it every year. If we're not there, you know, that has a message. And you know, basically you've got to be able to, or it's incumbent upon you to do that buyer's journey work and balance your marketing motions and spend to a line where the buyers are going for information. I mean, that's it's I know, certainly have done conferences because I've thought we needed to be there. And then people would push back and say, but we spend so much money. And it's like, well, but, we get the influence with the Gartner analysts and,
so it's a push-pull thing, isn't it? It's not always
a push-pull thing.
Yeah, it's not always the executives within outside marketing. It's sometimes the executives within marketing that need to have this debate as well, right? So,
exactly.
But also what I think is interesting here, and I think you've touched on it there, is we're hedging, aren't we, as marketers? I mean, I don't think anybody should read a report like this and go, "Oh my God, I should be 100% into this channel," or I should split my money 3 ways across these 3 channels. I think all of them play a role, right? It's just I think the point is you need to get that balance right. And make sure you're in all the right places, but with all the right amount of level of effort, money, budget, whatever it is we're referring to, right?
Absolutely.
But I think that's interesting. Yeah. So I mean, it's a nice post, a nice idea, and I'm glad we sort of highlighted it this week. And of course, I'll include a link to it in the show notes. And we seem to be not sure of the veracity of the data, but certainly something for us to think about. So, what did you conclude?
I think that it just underscores why marketers need to research where their buyers are going to do their research to solve their business problems, and you got to be where they're going to be looking for information. We're trying to help them in a buying process, and we've covered buyers' journeys a couple times. We did the 5 fundamentals of the buyer's journey, which was episode 238, not too long ago. And then we actually did a review of different buyer journey models, by all the analyst groups, Pedowitz, Forrester, and Gartner.
Oh, yeah.
Because they sometimes, using an industry model, particularly if you're trying to figure out how to lay your data out as to where people are engaging in a process, it's good to start with that. Yeah. And so, as I've always said that particularly when we talk about the importance of designing a campaign, is you got to be where your buyer is. You got to know what their watering holes are, and that's engagement there, which helps you identify contacts to put against opportunities, to show you're engaging with them, and making sure you're engaging in the places that they're going to tell you, through interviews, surveys, etc., is what's influential to them. That's how you design a campaign, and that's how you figure out how to allocate your budget.
Splendid. So just as a reminder, that was an article on the Spark Toro blog post that we were talking about called "If Your Audience's Source of Influence and Your Marketing Budget Don't Align, You're Going to Have a Bad Time," which I think we've reflected. No, we didn't have a bad time. We had a good time. I didn't mean like that. Sounded bad. So our last agenda item, my friend. Did we do the weather? How is the weather in Massachusetts?
The weather is. We're actually having kind of a warm day.
Nice.
It's like when I left Oslo, Norway, it was 0 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah.
When I got to Amherst, Massachusetts, it was close to 0 degrees Fahrenheit. I felt like I didn't, but it has warmed up, and we got a little snow and all that. Nice. So that's all the weather here.
So our last agenda item is the song, and as you've been away, my friend, I thought I'd let you pick. What are you going for this week?
Well, there's the song "Money Talks" by AC/DC in 1990, which I just thought there's a line that just lines up with the thread of this article. "The claim is on you, the sights are on me. So what do you do that's guaranteed?"
Nice. All right, cool. Well, then we'll play out with Money Talks from AC/DC 1990. And will you be welcoming me in the studio next week, Matt?
Yes, I will.
I look forward to it. I'll see you then.
Cheers.
Cheers, buddy. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Jeff. And as ever, really interesting research from Spark Toro there that I will include a link to in the show notes. And by the way, Jeff is combining his passion for the planet, marketing and technology with a new project called Clean Tech Insiders that I'll also include a link to in the show notes. So that's a wrap on episode 253 of the Rockstar CMO effing marketing podcast. Thank you for dropping a dime into your podcast and jukebox, selecting our track and driving along with us. I've been your host, Ian Truscott, and you can find links to me and the team here and all the things we discuss in the show notes on rockstarcmo.com, as well as our blog, newsletter, and all of our previous episodes. Finally, I'd love to hear from you, so please say hello. If you connect on LinkedIn, please say you're a listener. And of course, if you like this, help spread the word by rating or reviewing us in your favourite podcast app, or just keep listening. I'm glad you're here. The next episode of the Rockstar Unrose will drop on Saturday, and next Wednesday, Jeff and I will pull on the thread we touched on there and chat about the buyer's journey. Until then, as Dewey Finn said in the School of Rock, you can't just say it, man. You've got to feel it in your blood and guts if you want to rock.
This podcast is heard along the Marketing Podcast Network. For more great marketing podcasts, visit marketingpodcasts.net.